Hi everyone, welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, and enthusiasts like Josh and myself. I am, of course, Dan. With me is Josh.
Hello, everybody.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things theological and ecumenical, because we're going to talk about more passions and questors, round 2.
Episode 2 of our series on this. Who are we talking about this week, Dan?
Chorrolis and Raggok.
Oh, we got one of the mad passions in here in this one.
Yeah, first mad passion. I figure we do 3, I can't say regular, but unmad, and then 1 mad every time. So next time around, we'll get to two normal passions. But this time is, Chorrolis and Raggok, and the questors involved therein. So if you have any questions for us after you hear this, or any suggestions about something we missed, we actually have an email held over from last time about devotions that people can play, people can do when they're not a questor for either one of these. We're going to incorporate those today as well. But feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And we can just dive right in, essentially, because last time we covered 2 passions and questors in a little over an hour. I think we can maybe come in under an hour this time around. We'll give it a shot. So Chorrolis is the passion of wealth, trade, envy, and desire, not greed.
Not.
There's a fine line there.
Well, I mean, when you start dealing with envy and desire, there is a strong aspect of greed that goes along with that.
Yes, just a little bit.
And this is another of those cases where, like, oh, well, when we talk about the passions are representatives they are associated with the ideals, like positive ideals of society.
Yes.
Envy ain't necessarily one of those.
Well, the grass is always
and desire. Now,
there.
we talked in our first episode about that. We talked about some of the overlap that exists in some of the ideas, like with Astandar, where you've got love compared to, more of a romantic love compared to Garland's like filial family love kind of situation, like where there are some different aspects perhaps of the same emotion. Desire being associated with Chorrolis, desire is also something that could conceivably be associated with love, right? Where you feel desire for someone, but the desire, I think, that Chorrolis relates to, especially if you take that in the context of envy, you start to see more of like a covetousness, a desire of ownership. And I think that when you start talking about the kind of desire that Chorrolis might inspire if it comes to relationships as opposed to just money, that's some potentially toxic. Like at that point, you're looking at owning someone or wanting to possess them in a sense, as opposed to the other aspects of that.
Yeah, I could see where this would lead people down maybe the wrong path if they tried to quest for Chorrolis a little bit. I was looking at envy and desire more as in the grass is always greener on the other side of the lawn, on the other side of the fence, where you envy their success with something and you desire it for yourself as well, might cue you closer to the path of Chorrolis versus leading down the jealousy path that we'll get into in the other half of the episode.
Right. Well, the other thing is, and mentioned this a little bit with the first episode on passions, where we talked about one of the things we wanted to do with the passions book, with the questors book, was perhaps show some indications of how even someone who is following a presumably sane passion, a good passion, a non-mad passion, could, by carrying those ideals in a certain direction and to a certain degree, might not necessarily be the epitome of a good member of society. I think, in fact, the essay by the questor of Chorrolis that is in the book is one of those that is kind of slanted in that regard, and some of the points of view and the ideas that are presented in that essay. People often talk online about Chorrolis might actually not be completely sane himself. Again, talking about the idea of envy and greed of the sort of darker aspects that go along with those ideals that he is connected with can lead to some very toxic and destructive and dark places. Even though he is ostensibly not a mad passion, the things that people could do. And some of this is epitomized and described in the Travar book, which is very heavily a city that is influenced by Chorrolis.
Absolutely.
In its own way. You know, the damage and the problems that can come about as a result of pursuit of profit above all.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Late stage capitalism is a hell of a drug.
Well, I love the fact that it's wealth and trade, which essentially, if you can condense those two down, would be prosperity. And so making your life better, maybe.
Lest our listeners misunderstand me, yes. I have no problem with trade. I'm a big fan of trade. Trade gets our books into people's hands around the world.
Absolutely.
And in exchange puts money in our coffers that allows us to then
do more,
produce more books.
Oh,
I am a huge fan of trade.
My favorite line from the essay is, coins are useless if they aren't moving from one hand to the next. Money sitting in a vault does nothing. It doesn't bring me more. I wanted to make sure that got on the podcast.
Yeah, that's actually a really, one of the things actually that I find interesting about the Chorrolis essay in Questors. Yeah. And that was one that was written by, was that written by Anthony? I think it was written by Anthony. Yeah, Anthony Jennings. He did Chorrolis. He did, pretty sure he did Low Cost. He might have done a third one. Anyway, he brought really interesting takes on all of the ones that he wrote. Yeah. And I'm absolutely thrilled that he did the work that he did on those. But there is the aspect of that character, of that questor of Chorrolis, who he's got a lot of money that is moving around. Like, he invests it. He spends his earnings to fund other caravans and all of this stuff. And it's mentioned in one of the sidebars or something like that, that he was not ostentatiously displaying his wealth.
No.
That he, that devotion, that idea. And an interesting side note, actually, I mean, a lot of the focus on Chorrolis, understandably, because it's a role-playing game and people like getting money, is dealing with it in terms of money and trade from a financial standpoint. But trade is not just financial.
Yeah.
Trade also promotes cultural exchange, right? One of the ways, in a sense, that Throal dominates the province the way that it does is not through military might, the way that Thera often kind of imposed their will on things, but by their traders, their merchants that go across the province, traveling from town to village and so forth, spreading as part of that the ideals of Throal, but that representation being not necessarily, although there are absolutely negative vibes with regards to, like, not completely ethical Throlic traders taking advantage of folks. But that idea, but the ideals of the Council Compact and the Book of Tomorrow, I mean, all of that sort of stuff, while Throal does not necessarily have the really strong passions-inspired trade that is kind of the hallmark of Travar, Chorrolis is very much a part of Throal and the cultural exchange and the cultural trade that it kind of goes on with that, and in its own way kind of unifies Barsave under that larger philosophical banner.
Yeah, because a trade is supposed to improve both participants in that, either culturally or monetarily or
both.
Hell, even or both, or even, in any which way you want it to do trade. You want to trade customs, you want to trade ingredients, you want to trade raw materials, you want to trade languages, you want to trade money, you want to trade goods for services, whatever the case may be. It's supposed to benefit both parties. And so that is the Chorrolis, where you've got the envy and the desire to improve your situation, because you're envious of something else you don't have. You desire something you don't have. Therefore, you're looking to prosper from it. And if you get that trade done, then you can prosper from it, and therefore that is your new wealth. You've prospered from those other three things you used to get that wealth, to get that end result you're looking for.
Right.
So that's how I tie all those together, because the elements of Chorrolis are found in, bags of treasure, caravans, Epicurean delights, so therefore, rich, rare
displays of wealth.
Yes, and goods for sale. So all of those things you can find Chorrolis in. So if you're in his powers are fantastic. He can incite greed. So I love how they tiptoed around it, and then all of a sudden, poof! No, his actual powers, he can incite greed.
He can make you. There. He can make you want something.
Yes, absolutely. But he can also encourage trade, and my favorite power that he's got is instantly travel along any trade route, water or land. Air doesn't count because it's just wide open. There's no direct whatever. Mm-hmm. It's just to the sky. But, water or land, any trade route you want to go to. So, Chorrolis always appears as a well-to-do person.
Yes.
A little hefty, they're
often
sedentary.
Because carrying, being a little bit on the heftier side is in a way a symbol of wealth and
status,
largesse, because you have the resources to be able to
work a little bit less.
To work a little bit less, but also that you can eat more. And if we're talking about sort of the stereotypical Middle Ages type of subsistence farming sort of situation, somebody who is wealthy enough to actually be overweight. Yeah. That is in its own way kind of a symbol of wealth and privilege, in much the same way that being very pale skinned meant that you weren't out working under the hot sun in the fields all day.
Of course. So let's go over a couple of devotions that somebody who's not a questor could do for the benefit of Chorrolis, to show that they're devoted to them, before we get to the actual questors themselves. Because I figure if you're looking to have maybe an NPC come in and be somebody who's passionate about, tongue-in-cheek, Chorrolis, but not necessarily quite good enough to be a follower or a questor just yet, that they would encourage any of the player characters to haggle, maybe trade items instead of just paying for them outright, maybe travel with a caravan, because caravan, of course, is one of the elements of Chorrolis as well, and maybe offer up some of their own items for sale and see what they can possibly get for them. So encouraging the trade in the negotiation process of acquiring goods and services. So I figured those are a couple of them. Any ideas for you, Josh?
Yeah.
You probably have better ones than I do. So.
Well, I mean, you can always look at the acts of devotion that are given as examples for questors.
Yes.
And use those as kind of ideals or things that people could do. One of the things that was kind of brought up in the aftermath of our previous episode is that you might see, talking about Astandar, you might see, and similar to the way that the Greek poets and playwrights would perhaps start off their works by invoking the muses, as part of the text, calling on the muses to bless the performance or to inspire what is to go on there, that you might see a call to Astandar as part of the opening lines of an epic or something like that a troubadour or other performing artist might work into their work. And in a similar way, you might see merchants, even if they're not questors, but you might see merchants perhaps have a small shrine or symbol or something like that to Chorrolis as part of their shop setup, as part their stall. They might do something that perhaps invokes or have some little ritual that they do that invokes Chorrolis as part of any time that they are going to be doing a negotiation. I look in I'm sure, because I don't have it here right in front of me, the Travar book probably has some ideas as well that are talked about there in the Travar book when it's talking about the city being devoted to trade and Chorrolis. There are probably some things that are mentioned there.
About every fifth word Travar was about Chorrolis, but yes.
Because one of the questions that came up that we read for the live show was introducing players new to the setting to the ideas represented by a passion.
Yes.
And so figuring out ways that normal people might invoke those passions as part of what they are doing.
Yeah. I do want to make it clear that I think that devotions may be by an NPC to, like I said, dangle the carrot, or at least whet the appetite for somebody who might be wanting to follow in the path of Chorrolis as a questor, is that encouraging others to haggle and trade is one thing that they could do. It's not betting or wagering. Mm-hmm. That's not Chorrolis' thing.
Not generally, no.
No. So I just wanted to make that clear. Is you can probably, entice somebody or goad somebody. Hey, let's make a wager. Let's make a bet. That's not a Chorrolis type thing.
Yeah, there's not really trade. That's focusing over much on the financial aspect of things, on the money aspect of things, when really the stronger positive focus for Chorrolis is trade and what that does for society as a whole in terms of allowing people to specialize in a trade and to be able to exchange those goods and their expertise for things that they need from somebody else. That basically that difference from the hunter-gatherer / subsistence farmer kind of situation to we have cities, we've got people who are specialized in trades and experts at certain things, and the culture and society that grows up around that.
Yeah, they look at the trade and the interaction of, be it money, be it goods, be it services, as the lifeblood of a society. If that's not flowing, if those trades aren't flowing monetarily, culturally, then your society is going to die off. And so that's what the followers of questors of Chorrolis look for, especially, and devotees as well. So how about we go through some of the powers, the devotions that questors can actually get when they begin to follow Chorrolis, because again, there's the three tiers we covered before, and you get the follower, the adherent, and the exemplar. We'll go over those every single time, but the follower devotions we've pretty much heard most of before: bribery, conversation, etiquette, evaluate, first impression, haggle, lip reading, and I think we covered passions, empowerment. That's something that every single questor gets eventually. Streetwise, but my new favorite one, pigeon.
Pigeon. Yeah, this basically allows it's kind of a not like fully speak language kind of thing.
Yeah.
It basically allows the questor to facilitate communication between groups. While they are using that power, groups can kind of talk with each other enough to facilitate the trade and the relationship that's going to be involved in that. It's not like speak language where once you learn the language, you kind of know it going on. We're going to facilitate short-term communication between these two groups.
Just enough to make a negotiation happen, not necessarily to, make a dissertation on or write a doctoral thesis.
Kind of inspired by the passion, magically smushes the two languages together, or more languages together, in order to allow them to kind of communicate.
Exactly. So that's pretty much it for the follower devotions. Most of those are talents we know from having discussed all of the disciplines beforehand. So the adherent devotions for a Chorrolis questor is assess intentions, diplomacy, insight obsession, resist taunt, true sight. We know all those. So let's go with Heart's Wish.
Heart's Wish allows the questor to find out what the target's fondest desire is, their strongest desire. Basically make a test against their social defense and find out what they want, the most important thing that they want at that moment.
Yeah. Nice.
I know what you want. Now that allows me to
leverage that
to strike some deal where I can provide that to you in exchange for something that I want. Or perhaps I am looking to get something from you. I now know what you want. That allows me to, again, facilitate potentially that trade. Insight Obsession is actually a new one. That's also a questor power. It basically allows the questor to make somebody be obsessed over something.
It's kind of an offshoot of the incite greed a little bit.
It provides the target bonuses to actions, bonuses to tests that relate to obtaining that obsession, or and a penalty on anything else. As with a lot of passion, with a lot of questor devotions, the bonuses are plus and minus 2 for non-adepts.
Yes. I meant to say passion's inspiration was something we had covered before, but I was wrong. You were correct. Inside obsession. So psychometry also new.
Yeah, that's actually a knack in the companion. I think it's connected to item history, where item history normally requires the person using it to study the item for a week before they can make the test in order to learn things. Psychometry allows them to pick up an item and short term learn a little bit about its history. It doesn't do anything as far as unlocking key knowledges of thread items, but you can pick up an item and learn a little bit about a history. Like that's the sort of thing that would maybe be used in conjunction with, if you're doing an investigation, you pick up an item.
Evidence analysis.
It would allow potentially a questor who has that ability. They find an item and the merchant that's selling it is telling some story about its history or whatever, and they can pick it up, and if successfully using that, know whether the individual is telling the truth about the history of the item or something like that.
Very cool.
So it does provide some limited seer type impressions and knowledge about an item's history without unlocking any of the thread item required stuff that's normally associated with item history.
Nice little version of that. And then Resistant and True Sight we know about. So those are the adherent devotions, a couple of new ones in there. The exemplar devotions, once you get high enough at being a questor of Chorrolis. Enchanted Gift.
Enchanted Gift, the questor creates an item suitable and symbolic to the questor's passion as a gift to evoke a specific base emotion in the recipient, which is then directed at a specific subject. And they make a test. If successful, there are bonuses to social tests that further that emotion and penalties to tests that are contrary to it. So in this case, for a questor of a questor of Chorrolis that is doing Enchanted Gift, gets, if given a gift, then gets bonuses or penalties based on whatever kind of action that the questor wants to inspire the target toward. The target doesn't necessarily need to know that the item itself is enchanted, but there is a little bit of a restriction in terms of they need to obviously present it as a gift. Like there are some restrictions and guidelines in terms of how it's like, you can't secretly, in some respects, you can't secretly do it. You are presenting it as a gift. And not just, I enchant this thing and drop it in their pocket and suddenly they start behaving differently. You give them the thing clearly. They just don't necessarily need to know that it's going to magically compel them to, or magically prod them to do certain things.
Gotcha. And then one of them in here, I think Safe Thought is pretty well known, but Grip of Chorrolis. Yeah,
Grip of Chorrolis, the questor enchants a pouch of coins, causing those in the area to become much more interested in financial ventures. If successful, a target is more interested in schemes involving money than normal, whether responsible investments or get-rich-quick schemes. Again, it gets some bonuses and penalties to social tests related to that stuff.
Of course. And then my favorite...
But it only relates to instigating transactions. It doesn't do anything to actually affect whether those transactions will be successful or not.
Of course not. And my favorite exemplar devotion, Let's Make a Deal.
Let's make
Monty
a deal.
Hall. Invoking Monty Hall.
The haggle talent / skill / devotion only goes so far. Once sort of, if you are using the mechanics for that, once the test fails, then negotiation ends and the price is sort of settled. Let's Make a Deal allows the questor to say, basically start that process over again, inspires the target with the desire to negotiate an offer they have previously turned down.
Oh, there you go.
This can even include things like even beyond, like above and beyond, the haggle is over, we're going to try and go further. This is, I want to buy this incredibly rare item off of you and you refused. I am going to now magically passions inspire you to actually open negotiations on this thing.
Very cool. And then we have two more. Touching the Past.
Touching the Past is another knack. It's also off of item history. It's on the same page as Psychometry, which is 96 in the companion.
Gotcha. Cool. And then Undermine.
Undermine, I believe, is also, it's as it's a high circle talent. Not sure exactly what that does off the top of my head. Uses inherent superiority to make the target feel inadequate. So they make a test against the target's social defense. Each success reduces the target's social defense by 1.
Okay.
It's a social defense debuff.
Yes.
Basically, you undermine their confidence and give them social defense penalties, which makes it easier because so many Chorrolis questor devotions are based off of social defense.
Yes.
Makes it a lot easier to use other abilities on them. You basically weaken their resolve and self-confidence in a sense, making it easier to use other abilities on them.
Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's really... So we've had 2 passions so far, Astendar and... I blanked completely on who we did last time. Jasperi. And now we've done Chorrolis. I think all 3 of these are rather easy to kind of insert into the game and flush out the larger realm of Earthdawn so that anybody new or veteran players can understand who and where Chorrolis might come from and how to kind of lace in the idea of becoming a questor of them.
As a quick comparison, Undermine is an 11th Circle Troubadour Discipline talent.
Ooh, that is way up there.
It is available as an option to Warden Tier Swordmasters as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, would you find it difficult to lace in ideas of maybe the idea of someone becoming a questor for Chorrolis? Because I think it's pretty easy to do Chorrolis as well.
It depends on the type of game you're running. Jasperi, we had talked about, is fairly easy in some respects to bring in to a situation. Chorrolis does not align themselves with a discipline quite as strongly as others might.
Agreed.
An argument could be made that perhaps Weaponsmiths, because of their craftsman and connection with making things and whatnot,
and the commerce business,
that business, like that aspect of things could potentially relate to Chorrolis, but that's not. They say, like, what passion would Weaponsmiths be most associated with? Chorrolis is not the first one that comes to mind.
No.
Air sailors, maybe, in their capacity as merchants, as those, like, maybe piloting merchant vessels and so forth.
Yeah.
Boatmen adepts, again, like with the Tiskrang, Ropagoi, could potentially be related to Chorrolis. But if you're dealing with a game, I would not necessarily expect player characters to go questing for Chorrolis.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something that I would see as one of the more common choices. It's certainly possible if you've got a game that is going to perhaps somehow be focused around, especially if you've got a Travar-based game revolving around a lot of the merchant houses and stuff that's going on there. You could definitely see a Questor of Chorrolis being particularly advantageous and having a player character that might want to gain that leverage.
Oh, yeah.
But because of Chorrolis' association with trade and merchant caravans and the Tiskrang, Ropagoi, and the riverboat trade and all of that, the association that adept groups frequently have with guarding caravans or working for merchants or various other aspects of that, bringing Chorrolis into a game in some respects is not a difficult concept. I think that's something that can work fairly well. And as with other questors, as we have talked about in the past, multiple followers or devotees of Chorrolis could potentially come into conflict if they're going after the same thing. If you get rival merchant houses that are both trying to go and get an agreement, a contract with a place, that there could be some conflict or rivalry or difficulty that comes out as a result of that.
There's some envy and some desire there, yes.
if you've got a game that's going to be dealing with those kinds of themes, then Chorrolis is kind of a natural fit. There's a great little adventure in the Parlainth Adventures collection from first edition.
Yes.
I think it's called the Passions Box. Basically, the premise of the adventure is there's this box that shows up and everybody wants it because everybody gets the box. When they get the box, it's like it was found in the ruins. And when somebody has the box, they are convinced that whatever is in the box will give them exactly what they want. And it makes them incredibly persuasive in terms of convincing people that is the case. And like the box causes all kinds of trouble in Haven as it bops around from hand to hand. And like the adventure ends with Chorrolis himself showing up and saying, "Oh, I had forgotten about this," and taking it and absconding.
Yes.
Taking off at the end. That's a great little adventure. Really heavily focused on a passion that you might be able to look at for inspiration.
I ran that one. That was fun. My players like that one.
That one is a lot more effective to run if you've got established relationships with the NPCs that are involved.
So I ran that one, I think, third. Because I ran the Parlainth Adventures out of order because they're published 1, 2, 3, 4. I ran them out of order on purpose because I wanted to do that one like third before I got to the end. And yes, that one was absolutely fun. Everybody knew the NPCs. And since I had veteran players with veteran characters, they were able to interact in a much better way than just novices first time out. So that one was worth the wait in getting to, but absolutely fantastic.
The motivations for questors of Chorrolis can be relatively simple. Like you're dealing with trade, you're dealing with money and whatnot. One of the things that you might want to think about if you're looking to shake things up, maybe approach things a little bit differently, is to look at other ways that you might metaphorically. I mean, we talked about cultural exchange. We talked about like trade in that regard, not being just a matter of exchanging coin and goods, but exchanging culture and looking at maybe some of the other metaphors that could be used for these ideals and how they might come into play with something like that. Yeah.
I think that kind of lays out the groundwork for Chorrolis a little bit, or a lot in this case. So let's move on to our mad passion. Evil laugh insert here. Insert evil laugh here. So we're talking about formerly known as Rashomon, but this is Raggok. And Raggok's ideals are vengeance, bitterness, and jealousy. So not quite envy and desire. This is jealousy. So there's that fine line.
This is the dark, like this is, yeah.
The green-eyed monster?
When you come to like the mad passions, Raggok is in some ways kind of in some ways the easiest to understand, or kind of the most in your face aspect of it. He's the, vengeance,
very upfront,
and bitterness. And this is where, something has just gripped your heart and is twisting it to vengeance, and just, ugh. He is also, Raggok they are also very strongly associated with the undead and corruption sort of as a general concept.
Yes.
Love turned to hate kind of aspect of things. And so questors of Raggok and powers associated with Raggok have the ability to affect undead the same way that they would normal people.
Yes.
We didn't mention it explicitly, but Jasperi actually, their powers can also be used on not just name givers, but on creatures as well.
Yes. Yes, because they were flora and fauna. But the elements of Raggok are, as you said, undead, skeletons, wounds, insects, and oddly enough, swords, and then snow or ice.
Again, you talk about like swords kind of make sense in the idea of vengeance, of looking to go and strike down and kill those that you feel have wronged you.
Yeah.
Snow and ice, you're talking about like a frozen heart kind of thing. The cold. Revenge is a dish best served cold.
Cold. Oh, totally.
So there's that aspect of things. There's an aspect of Raggok's ideals that can be very calculating in a sense of like planning the Poe story, the Cask of Amontillado. That is a Raggok situation. That is someone who is so driven by bitterness and the desire for vengeance that they concoct this elaborate plan to just inflict suffering on their chosen victim.
And the Count of Monte Cristo as well. The whole premise is based upon jealousy, and then the result of that jealousy is the wronged person coming back with nothing but vengeance and bitterness toward the person who is jealous of him. So the whole thing is a Raggok passion, front to back, up and down, left and right. So that'll be fun to kind of go with as well. So Raggok's powers are to instill painful memories, raise the undead, inspire hatred, and I love the fact that this just kind of creates a mob mentality where he can mind hop from name giver to name giver within like a 50-foot radius. And so he can just like ping pong or pinball through all the name givers around you, inspiring all these painful memories and inspiring hatred. So this is where you get that nasty, nasty mob mentality of vengeance is theirs. So mob rule is not a good thing. So shall we discuss the devotions that, because this is a pretty easy passion to get behind, just to go, oh yeah, that's pretty evil. We can understand that without too much muss or fuss. So the follower, adherent, and exemplar abilities a questor of Raggok could get. Again, the follower devotion's not too different from what we've gone through before. This is where you get a durability of 5.
Well, part of the reason for that is that when we're talking about questors of the mad passions, they are frequently going to be antagonists. They're going to be enemies. And so giving them durability as a devotion that they have access to makes it possible, makes it easier to create just a questor that can physically stand up to the output that an adept party would be able to bring to bear on them. That's part of the reason for that. But also as a flip side of the fact that they want to inspire and inflict pain and suffering on their targets. The sadomasochist kind of aspect of things, that durability also allows them to consequently endure suffering at a greater extent.
Yeah. So you get the durability, and then battle shout. We just talked about enchanted gift, frighten, grave commands, passions empowerment, resist influence, surprise strike. But I think there's 2 new ones on here. Cold reminder.
Cold reminder allows the questor to enchant some water, causing it to freeze, and all of those within the area of effect feel the sting of bitterness and regret and basically become short-tempered and suffer penalties to interactions with people who are being friendly and outgoing.
Nice. Or, well, not so nice. And then torment.
Grave Commands is also new in this book. Basically, it's what allows Questor of Raggok to control undead.
Yeah, that's not going to be a good day.
Basically, if they make a successful test against the undead, they gain control of them. The undead will follow their commands for whatever the limits on that are.
Well, there you go. And then torment. It's a lovely word.
Torment. Oh. It's sort of like the pain spell.
Oh, there
in
you
that
go.
the questor makes a test against the target social defense, and for each success, the target effectively suffers a wound penalty per success. Yeah, basically, it's an incapacitating kind of, much like the Nethermancer pain spell.
Yeah, because it just affects the wounds. So that's already just badass right there. So the adherent devotions for a questor of Raggok, grave empowerment.
Grave empowerment grants bonuses to attack and damage to undead that are within range.
Gotcha. And then insight obsession and insight rage, we've kind of, I think, covered before with...
Well, insight obsession we talked about with Chorrolis. Insight rage forces the target into aggressive attack and will attack the nearest living thing, fighting to the death, regardless of whether it's a friend or ally. Basically forces a berserker rage on someone.
Okay, then. And Inspired Might.
Inspired Might, the targets gain bonuses to strength-based tests for feats of strength or doing damage to inanimate objects.
So this is
getting people to break down a door,
smash,
that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't do any like combat damage, but it basically inspires strength in them to tear down someone's home or any kind of.
It helps with your mob rule.
Yeah.
And then Intimidating Bellow.
Intimidating Bellow is a knack based off of probably Battle Shout or
Battle Bellow.
It's based off of Battle Bellow.
There you go.
It basically does something slightly different than the normal Battle Bellow, but it provides penalties, action test penalties, fear-based action test penalties.
Gotcha. Fair enough. We've covered Passion's Inspiration. Poisoned Influence.
Poisoned Influence is also a knack. It's a diplomacy knack. Instead of... It basically does the opposite of diplomacy. Instead of helping work out a negotiation between parties, it makes it more difficult.
It sabotages the whole thing.
Instead of improving the attitudes of the negotiating parties, it worsens the attitudes between the negotiating parties.
Makes the whole thing deteriorate. Gotcha.
The idea being to cause strife and difficulty.
Yeah. The last adherent devotion is Steely Stare, which we all know. And then onto the exemplar devotions. Inspired Endurance, because Resist Pain is familiar. Vital Strike is familiar, but yeah.
Inspired Endurance... Targets are immune to the effects of fatigue for 4 hours per success.
Wow. 4 hours. That's a long.
They still must rest as normal in order to make recovery tests, but they don't need sleep for the duration of the effect.
Oh, there you go. And then Taste of Power.
Taste of Power. Questor tempts a target into serving their passion and committing deeds that meet the passion's approval by granting access to the Questor's devotions.
There you go.
The Questor whispers in the target's ear, promising power, explaining the devotion if necessary, hints at further rewards that lay down that path. If successful, and makes a test. If successful, the target gains access to the selected devotion at the same rank as the Questor, 4 rank hours. The Questor during that time cannot... Basically, they temporarily loan their devotions to a target.
Nice.
And provides bonuses to the target that are in pursuit of the passion's goals. If you want to take some pop culture references here, this is a little bit, not quite, but I'm thinking of Wormtongue from Lord of the Rings, the guy who was whispering in the king of Rohan's ear, and I can't think of his name right now. Theoden, King Theoden's ear. Also sort of a little bit of the thing that was happening, although not quite to the same extent with the Steward of Gondor, where he was in communication with, used the Palantir in communication with Sauron, and was being affected by that. It's that kind of idea, although in this case, the Questor is basically whispering to get the... Wormtongue kind of convinced Theoden to exile Eomer.
Yes.
So it's like that kind of thing, but basically giving them the power to do something that the passion wants to see done and promising them more power if they do it. And it's all... the other neat thing connected with that is that if the target of that devotion performs acts that would be considered acts of devotion, the Questor gains those devotion points.
Very nice. And then we already covered Undermine from the last conversation. So Vicious Wound.
Vicious Wound, I'm pretty sure, is a knack.
Pretty sure.
Oh, no, it's a talent. It's a talent. Sorry.
Oh, gotcha. Fair. Just a higher circle talent. Because I know Vital Strike is also a higher circle talent. So those are your last 2 exemplar devotions. So
yeah, Vicious Wound. Basically reduces the wound threshold of the target.
2 things that affect wounds now.
And basically allows the person using it to deal multiple wounds with a single hit if their damage test is high enough.
There you go.
They reduce the wound threshold And for every
Can do multiple.
success, they deal an additional wound for each success above the target's adjusted wound threshold.
Whew. Nasty.
Well, it's an exemplar. I mean, that's a master's, that's a warden/master tier talent. It's an exemplar devotion. It's a nasty stuff.
Yeah. So perhaps you could make a solo quester of Raggok who doesn't need to be an adept in any other fashion, and just make one or two of them be enough of an antagonist for a small party.
Yeah, they would probably, I mean, when you're looking at a questor of Raggok, you've got a couple of different approaches you can take.
Mm-hmm.
One is actually have a questor of Raggok be the stereotypical undead necromantic cult kind of thing, dealing with undead and whatnot, and having sort of minions and undead servants that are causing problems in an area. But understand as well that they are typically not doing it just to be evil. There is usually some kind of motivation or reason behind it, because they are being driven by their, at least initially, their relationship with Raggok came about as a result of jealousy and bitterness, you know, and that being perhaps expanded and extended by the passion beyond just like that initial bad feeling to name givers in general.
Yes.
The essay, as with all of the essays in the Questor's book relating to the mad passions, the Questor of Raggok in there is just a serial killer.
Yeah.
And it's like twisted into the recognition of, yes, I'm a monster and we are all monsters. I just don't deny that nature.
What I am. Yeah.
Nature of what I am. And the path of jealousy and darkness and corruption and murder that are prompted through that story. You can get some really, you know, again, Questors of Raggok as antagonists are going to be, they can be canny and have elaborate plans, but they are also the most blatant in their own regard.
That's a good word.
They enjoy causing pain, both physical and emotional, and are unapologetic and enjoy inspiring those negative feelings in other people, or exposing those negative feelings in other people.
Yeah.
There's some references to Giftbringer being inspired in part by the shopkeeper in Stephen King's Needful Things. Right?
Yes.
But there's also a very Raggok aspect to it, in that people have all of their petty jealousies and rivalries and stuff exposed and brought to the surface and are used against them in that sense. Yes. There is kind of a strong relationship, not only with the undead, but Raggok also has a very strong relationship in a sense with the horrors in terms of what they do.
Yes.
And it could be very interesting to perhaps have a situation that seems like it could be relating to a horror, but is in fact the manipulations and efforts of a Questor of Raggok that is causing the problems.
I was going to say,
as a little bit of a twist to that kind of classic Earthdawn
I was going to say, that would be a nice thing. I was going to say, that would be where to lead the party down that route, is make them think that somebody's horror tainted, and they're not. They're just a Questor of Raggok. And so you've got this whole new wrinkle to go, now what do we do with them? And maybe they take this person, and maybe they kill the Questor or not. But it's one of those, now they have a different avenue to look at to say, not everything's horror tainted. There is still just regular, good old fashioned evil. And you said there's another way to bring a Questor in.
I am now blanking on what the...
You said one, and then we went down this route.
Oh, yeah. Another way that you might approach things is to look at where Rashomon was before he was driven mad. He was the passion of rulership and stewardship, and
yes, because at that point he was only the passion
perseverance and stewardship and rulership of good
perseverance and leadership. Yeah,
good the positive aspects of that, and perhaps finding a way that those things could be could be twisted and taken as a dark mirror in terms of things. A like a town council member or burgermeister or mayor or somebody like that who has a position of authority and enjoys using that to cause problems for the people under their authority. A slumlord
stewardship
who
yes,
going beyond the profit motive, but going beyond, like, I'm going to keep these tenements, I'm going to keep these places that I own in squalid conditions to relish and bask in the suffering of the people who need to live in squalor and that sort of thing. There's a little bit of overlap in some respects. Like, you could look at Scrooge at his worst and the hatred that he sort of bears toward humanity in general. There's a lot of things about Scrooge that are always about the miserliness and the money that would make people think of Chorrolis, but there's also a bitterness.
He's a bitter old man.
Not that he necessarily wants to see people suffer, but he has no problem with people suffering. The thing that he says, some of them would rather die than be in the situation. Well, then they should go ahead and die. There's that bitter. I can't think of what the term is. Just like a general, like, hatred and disgust for humanity in general.
Contempt.
That sort of like worst aspects of Scrooge, where Scrooge is kind of like indifferent in a large part to the suffering of others. The questor of Raggok would go like that one step further and actually inflict. I think there is a little bit of satisfaction that Scrooge takes when he is verbally cutting down people who are expressing these notions of generosity and kindness towards people. Like, how stupid can you be? And a lot of that is driven by Scrooge's own background and what's happened to him.
Oh, totally.
And his experiences. But there is that like general, that disgust that kind of goes along with that can really kind of be brought to bear in maybe the motivations of someone who is maybe not being directly inspired to vengeance of a particular act by Raggok, but maybe who just generally has that just bleh.
So we were asked the question, how does somebody who is a supporter of Raggok, not necessarily a questor, do their devotions? I'm pretty sure that's pretty easy.
This is where I think, and again, I completely lost the thread of where I was going earlier, but we've got kind of two aspects of things. I think you can have the individual who might be suffering, who might be in pain because of something that was done to them, that might be prodded to feelings of vengeance or jealousy because of a particular act that might have been done that gives Raggok a toehold and allows Raggok to push that individual to do things without necessarily even perhaps being fully aware that they are taking steps down the path in service of the mad passion. Raggok whispers in their ear and gives them justifications for the way that they're feeling and twists their perceptions in much the same way that we kind of see in that story that's in the Questor's book, like what happens in the early stages of that.
Yes, totally.
And then you get like the full known, that not unwilling, but unwitting, perhaps, servant of Raggok in that regard. And then you've got the full-blown questor who has let that sort of inciting incident be expanded upon, and they find that they enjoyed the feeling that came along with enacting their revenge or taking whatever steps that they wanted to in paying back the feelings of jealousy or whatever, the incel school shooter kind of thing that gets through that and just finds that they really enjoy the power that comes along with that. and so then devotes themselves even more completely and goes even further down that path to find other justifications for them to inflict that pain and suffering. And they have the passion whispering in their ear, giving them the justification that they need to be just an utter, disgusting example of a human being.
I just watched a movie a couple days ago called Chronicle, and it stars Dane DeHaan and Michael B. Jordan. And they acquire these superpowers, and Dane DeHaan's character basically realizes that, no, I want to be an apex predator. Therefore, I don't have any problem squashing a bug. Why should I feel bad about that? I shouldn't feel bad about being an apex predator with anybody else. And so looks at humanity that exact same way. So if you needed another reference for exactly the vengeance idea that Raggok would instill in someone, that's it right there.
I mean, you look at, say, Jack the Ripper, and we don't know what was going on in his mind exactly. You know, we don't know the motives, but the fear that he inspired. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be simply a slasher kind of thing. There is a societal rot that is kind of reflected in Raggok. There's a darkness there. These are individuals who are fundamentally, on some level, psychologically and socially broken and giving into their darker impulses and inflicting that on society.
So here's the question. If Game Master has a player character who all of a sudden finds this vengeance angle or this bitter jealousy angle, how encouraging should that Game Master be to that player character to follow down this path?
I would step out of their game and have that conversation, and say, hey, here's an idea that I had. Here's something that's going on based on events that are taking place.
Yeah.
Are you okay with this? Because that's something that starts pushing a character down a path of being a villain.
Yep.
And that could be a fantastic story to tell with a player character going down that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some really potentially cool storytelling and role-playing and whatnot that can come about as a result of that. But that's something that, like any kind of horror gaming that really delves into darker topics, you want to make sure that you are in communication with the player. You don't want to deprotagonize them. You don't want to take control of the character away from the player.
Yeah.
You would want to approach that the same way that you would approach a horror, maybe taking a long-term investment in the character. Something that might read very well and be a very compelling story, the same way that, like, Chorrolis' relationship with the horror is during The Longing Ring. That's a very compelling and enthralling story to read. That is a very different situation from playing the character that is part of that relationship. It can certainly be done, but again, caution flag.
You're walking a fine line.
Caution flag, wet floor sign, dangerous, watch for falling rocks.
Yeah.
And again, also keep in mind that you've got potentially the other characters that are going on with that and how that could be effective. So you want to, again, there's an immersive school of thought when it comes to role play of taking what's called an actor stance, whereas you are just basically like playing the character and responding as you would in character and making things as a decision in the moment, and not necessarily taking that step back in what's sometimes called the author or director stance, where you are looking at them as a character that you are manipulating and having that distance between your emotions and your reactions as a player and stepping out from that immersion and the emotions and the reactions of the character and differentiating them to a certain extent and not being method about it. And I say that as someone with an acting background and talking about the bad method stories, like, you know, the Jared Leto playing the Joker in Suicide Squad thing.
Yeah.
like all of the worst examples of, oh, I was just playing my character kind of abusive, toxic garbage. If you can't tell from my tone of voice, I have a very low opinion of that. But it can work. It can be very compelling. It can be very cool. But you just want to be careful and make sure that that everybody involved is comfortable and that you have safety tools in place, however your table might choose to implement them, formally or semi-formally or whatever, so that you are not crossing lines that people are not comfortable being crossed. There's a great, potential for a redemption arc. I mean, there's all kinds of potentially cool stuff that you can do there that there are plenty of examples of in fiction, whether novels or movies or TV shows or whatever. You get into a very different dynamic when you're talking about a player character maybe kind of following one of those paths. Could be very interesting for a solo game.
Absolutely. I just figured I would broach that subject because somebody might question, what could be done other than having that questor always be an antagonist. Maybe somebody in the party wants to follow that route. So I'm looking forward to it. If somebody has any questions for us, I'm also looking forward to those and how we answer those. So by all means, reach out to us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Any final thoughts on our two passions and questors tonight?
I think we've covered everything pretty well.
Yeah, I think we did. A lot of the devotions and some of the really cool powers that either Chorrolis or Raggok can inspire for their questors or just grant their questors. So I think these are both, again, of the 4 that we've done so far, all 4 of these are pretty easy to work in some regard or another to kind of touch upon for anybody's campaign, anybody's overarching feeling of Earthdawn. So you can work in these 4 passions rather easily. We'll get to some more difficult ones a little bit later on. So other than that, folks, I thank Josh for making the time, and it's time for you to go find some passion in your legend.
Good night, everybody.